All right, I want to welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got you? Energy, the energy. We love it. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Great to see everybody. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mark Shapsis, Vice Chair over at Savills Commercial Real Estate, Global Commercial Real Estate Firm, and President of the NY Alliance. Want to welcome all of our guests and our members, of course, and really happy to have Bill Kane here to speak about the book that he just put out, that he wrote, the lessons from legendary UCLA coach John Wooden. Great story, full circle. I met Bill back in, I think, 2012, something like that, when I was working with Sumitomo Corp of America, and he was part of the executive team, and we got to know each other and got close and stayed in touch and worked on that project. And I actually was introduced to Sumitomo from the Alliance, from one of our members, from Rick Hoffman, and stayed in touch with them and kept my relationship, and have now, working with them now, as many people know. We have Nishizawa here from Sumitomo here today, and full circle. So it all comes together, and it's part of this room, and it all started here when I heard that Bill's book came out, which I remember him telling me about the book back in probably 2012. He was just talking about it. I was following it, and he's since moved on and is now teaching, which you'll hear more about. But I saw the book come out, and I, reached out and I said, just be perfect to come speak to the Alliance about all about the book. So looking forward to that. So thanks for being here. So again, we just want to tell all the guests about the room. The Alliance is a C-level business advisory group, and very proud of what we've put together here. The room's actually been around for 40 years. We call it the room because it's our community, and we're all very proud of that. And it's a 40 years, started in 1984, and it's just a great, great group. We have 40 different industries. No one competes with one another, but we all are out there working with each other and helping each other and building relationships, building business, and sharing intelligence. And it's pretty amazing. We actually calculated the amount of revenue generated from the room for the room in 23, and it was actually close to $60 million of business. So really, like, an unbelievable room. So membership is by invitation only, and you get sponsored by one of our members. The industry spot has to open. You're not automatically renewed, and each one of our members are true leaders in industries, and it's a great group. So look forward to our guest meeting, all of our members, and now that the guests are here, you're part of our community. And I'll say that we do have this special sauce, which I always talk about, that the members come together and are there for each other. So not only is there this amazing business that's created, but there's also, we're there for each other. People need each other for whatever it might be, good, bad, or indifferent. People rally behind them, and you see that all the time. So again, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'd like to now ask for Steve Greco to come up, who's the chair of the speaker committee, to introduce Bill.
Good morning. Good morning. All right. Thank you, Mark. I'm Stephen Greco for guests. I'm the regional sales leader, senior vice president for USI Insurance Services, along with my associate, Phyllis Jackson. Welcome guests, welcome members. I want to give you a little background on Bill. Actually, we had a meeting with him, Mark, Evan, and I had to leave the meeting, and honestly, I didn't want to leave the meeting. It was a great meeting, telling us stories about his career and what he's done. So, and he's going to share that with you today. Just a little housekeeping. It's interactive, but wait for a pause, wait for Bill if there's any questions along the way, so we can get through it, and he will address any questions. In 2001, Bill began his doctoral studies with the global of finding and articulating the secret sauce of organizational leadership. We talk about secret sauce all the time. Through a former work colleague and friend, Bill was introduced to UCLA's legendary coach, John Wooden. For those of you that may be a little younger or not college basketball fans, John Wooden was probably the greatest coach in college basketball ever. His record was 664 wins and 162 losses. He was 6 times Coach of the Year. He coached in 1975. For us older guys, we remember it well. And not only was he a great coach, but everything you read about, I read a couple of his books, everything you saw, he was a great person. And Bill had the opportunity to share some time with him. He coached, you probably know basketball players, there's many of them, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, and Steve Kerr. So that's what led me, to have that time with Bill, and I probably could talk to him for hours upon hours. So he, prior to, William Kane is a faculty member at the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University. When not in the classroom, Bill consults with corporate leaders to help align and execute the people strategies associated with profitable business transformations. Prior to joining Rutgers, Bill's corporate career featured both line and staff positions, culminating in over 20 years of global experience across multiple industries as a highly accomplished CHRO, CAO in the Fortune 500 space. Bill has served on numerous advisory boards, including as an elected member of the Smithsonian Science Education Center in Washington, D.C., promoting STEM in academics. He has also been a member of the Conference Board CHRO Council. Bill has been active with and had leadership roles with several HR organizations and associations. He speaks at human resources and business conferences, and his views have been featured and quoted in multiple media outlets. Bill is the author of Truth About Thriving in Change, 2008, and Leading Business Teams, 2024, as Mark referred to. The latter book features a collaboration with the late coach John Wooden and Andy Hill. A lifelong trainer, Bill earned his PhD at the Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California. He holds 3 master's degrees. Jesus, Bill, you're busy, huh? An MA from Fielding in Human and Organizational Systems, an MBA in Management, and an MA in Organizational Psychology from Fairleigh Dickinson University. He has taken executive education programs at the International Institute of Management Development in Switzerland. He has received his executive organizational coaching certification from the Institute of Executive Coaching and Leadership in Sydney, Australia. His undergraduate degree is from Rutgers University. There's the New Jersey connection right there. Okay, Team Alliance and guests, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, William Kane. Will, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Well, thank you. And thank you, Steve, for that. I didn't think you were going to read the whole thing, but thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today and share some of the findings I've come across about leadership and management over the course of a 40-year career. Now, the good news is, even though some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit this morning are sports and basketball related, that's kind of the foundation, if you will. The good news is you don't need to know a thing about sports or basketball to appreciate, or I hope what you'll come to appreciate, the management principles I'm going to share with you this morning. So with no further ado, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. It sounds like the words secret sauce are getting a little bit of a workout here this morning, and perhaps appropriately so, whether it's that chemistry that holds a group like this together, and obviously the terrific results that can come from those connections. The secret sauce starts as a mystery. What is it? What is the secret sauce of leadership? I was starting my PhD in 2003, and I was mystified by this topic. I have worked for several different corporations, mostly in the Fortune 500 in my career. I've reported to actually I think the actual count is 12 CEOs in my career, mostly in the private equity and or public company space. And I've always been fascinated by the topic of the influence that a CEO has on the company? And very specifically, why is it in some environments that employees would run through a brick wall for a CEO, and in other cases, hesitate to answer the phone when it rings? What is it that causes that in a culture and in a company? I've always been fascinated by that. And then as I started to kind of peel back the onion on this topic, I thought, it's not just the CEOs, it's management as well. What is it that makes that manager, that people feel motivated, engaged, excited, satisfied, happy, will give that discretionary effort for, versus those that they will not? And when I started doing the research, as this slide indicates, companies don't, in general, spend a lot of time and attention on training managers. And this slide shows some statistics, I think, from the Center of Creative Leadership that say, hey, corporate America, I'll focus on the US, if you will, for this discussion, a geography I'm most familiar with, we don't invest in our managers. And the bottom bullet on this slide indicates that that can cause havoc for the people who report to those managers. Stress, misguidance, crazy priorities, deadlines that may not make sense. What is it we could and should be doing differently? And again, when you go even a little bit further down in the drilling, you see that middle management, they are the folks engaged in motivating, planning, organizing, controlling, staffing the organization as they look down. And yet they have to have that upward view of executing the business plan and the strategy. They're kind of squeezed in the middle. And this pie chart up on this slide shows that the average manager is responsible for administrative tasks, managing up, managing down. You can see hiring, recruiting, analyzing, reporting, administrative tasks. When do they have time to invest in themselves? And why aren't companies investing more in the management team? That was the premise for my thinking. I wanted to find the secret sauce behind what is it that makes one manager so engaging and motivational versus one that is not. And so my story begins for this book going back to UCLA days. That's Andy Hill on the left side there dribbling a basketball. That is circa 1970. Andy Hill was an all-city player in Los Angeles. Averaged something like 27, 28 points a game. Could have gone to any university to play basketball in the States. Was highly recruited. But he grew up in the shadow of UCLA. And he had one destination in mind, University of California at Los Angeles. And Andy wanted to go there for two reasons, well, three. One, obviously, to get an education. Secondly, was to play basketball for this rising coach, John Wooden, who had already won a couple national championships by the time Andy got there. And third, Andy wanted a father figure. Andy came from a home where the father figure, his father, wasn't always there and present. And I think he was kind of looking for a little bit of that when he got to his college experience as well. And so he went to UCLA. John Wooden recruited him. The answer was easy for him. When Andy got to UCLA, got off to a terrific start. He was co-MVP of the freshman team with someone named Henry Bibby. Henry Bibby went on to play in the NBA. And newspapers, everybody remember what a newspaper is in this room? Newspapers were talking about Andy Hill as one of the next legacy players at UCLA, one of the next up-and-coming great ones. Sophomore year comes. Andy tries out for the team, of course. Doesn't make the rotation. So the team has probably about 12 players on it, give or take. There's typically on a basketball team 7 or 8 players who play the most. Andy sat the bench. And Andy's next 3 years were turbulent in the sense of he was always mixing it up with Coach Wooden. He was mixing it up over politics in the times. Many of you would recall the late 60s in this country. It was a time of turmoil on college campuses specifically. Andy was mixing it up over playing time because Andy came here to play basketball and he's sitting on the bench. Right? These were issues that constantly caused strife between Andy and Coach. Andy went on to graduate in 1972. He was disappointed about his playing experience at UCLA and, frankly, his relationship with Coach Wooden. Okay? But as he said, it was a little hard to go into Coach Wooden's office, knock on the door and say, hey, Coach, if you put me in, our team will be better. Because during the 3 years Andy sat the bench there, UCLA's record, and don't quote me on this, I think was 81-3. They won 3 national championships. I think there were 1 or 2 undefeated teams. So it was a little hard to make that argument. Andy leaves UCLA, graduates, he plays ball in Europe, doesn't speak to Coach Wooden for 25 years. 25 years. Andy's on a golf course one day, 25 years later. And his playing partner says something to him. Some of you are golfers in this room. Follow through, keep your head down, whatever it was. And it kind of hit Andy that sounded very John Wooden-esque. Now, Andy, in his career, had gone on to be the head of CBS, the president of CBS Productions specifically. So he had had a terrific career in the entertainment industry. He thought after 25 years, let me give Coach a call. It's been too long. A lot of the things that I did in business where I was actually applying some of the Coach's principles, not even knowing it. Andy picks up the phone, dials Coach Wooden's number. Coach Wooden, his number was in the book, and gets the answering machine. And John Wooden's voice message says something to the effect of, you've reached Coach Wooden, please speak slowly and distinctly, leave a message, I'll return the call as soon as I can. Andy starts to leave a message. Coach picks up. Hi, Andy, how have you been? It's been too long, we need to get together, et cetera, et cetera. Andy's panicked over this. I was just hoping to get lucky and leave a message and, move on. They get together. And it was a reunion, if you will, that turned out to be a life's blessing for Andy, and I think for Coach as well. They became close as thieves, as Coach would go on to describe the relationship. Andy was a frequent visitor to Coach's aunt. They would have breakfast 3 to 4 times a week together. They were best friends in the last decade of the Coach's life. And you're wondering, what's that got to do with me? 2001, Coach and Andy published a book called Be Quick But Don't Hurry. And it was basically a semi-autobiographical account of the relationship he had with Coach, how it was broken, how they reunited, and how Andy had unknowingly applied a lot of the things he learned on a basketball court that he learned from Coach Wooden to his business career, and how that ultimately contributed to his success. Best-selling book, currently in its 16th printing, I believe. Andy Hill and I worked together at Channel One in the late 90s. I worked in New York, I was one of the suits. He worked in Los Angeles, he was in charge of talent. Ran our production studio. Andy and I'm in Los Angeles roughly once a month, give or take, talking about HR issues, employee relation issues, whatever the case may be. And Andy and I become pretty close and friendly. I mentioned to Andy, we worked together for, I guess, about 3-4 years. I mentioned to Andy that I'm going to begin my PhD. I've always wanted to have a PhD, and I wanted to really explore this topic of leadership. And Andy Hill says to me, you really should spend some time with Coach Wooden. Now, I am a huge basketball fan, huge college basketball fan. And I kind of said, John Wooden? And he said, yeah, I actually played basketball at UCLA. I am totally dumbfounded by this. I have worked literally side by side with Andy for 3 or 4 years. He has never mentioned the fact, and he knows I'm a big college basketball, he never mentions the fact that he played for the greatest coach of all time. And I said to him, why is it you've never mentioned this before? And I'll never forget his answer. I was embarrassed. I said, you play for the greatest coach, you're on 3 national championship teams. He said, but I really felt like, I was the guy who went in the game when people were starting their cars in the parking lot. Now, UCLA's second team was probably as good as any other school's first team. But Andy was embarrassed about playing at UCLA. That stunned me a little bit. He said, you want to come out and speak and spend some time with Coach Wooden, who he had reunited with. I, of course, said yes. I don't think he finished asking the question. But it occurred to me, what questions am I going to ask this basketball coach about leadership? I mean, sure, he's a terrific basketball coach. And I've got some statistics. You heard Steve mention a few of them earlier. What am I going to learn from a basketball coach? I mean, I have been studying leadership now. I'm trying to learn more about it. I'm at the library. I'm at Barnes & Noble, for those of you who remember Barnes & Noble when it had hard copies on the shelves. I'm looking at books about politics, social leaders, corporate leaders, religious leaders. What is the common thread between all of these and leadership? And sure, I can come up with some common characteristics. But where's that secret sauce? Where is that secret sauce that says, I will go through a brick wall for you? And so I flew to Los Angeles. And I'm thinking on the whole way out there, oh my God, I can't just sit down and casually interview him. I've got to have a pretty formal agenda here. And I did the whole 6-hour flight to Los Angeles. I'm working on my questions. And I've got them. And I'm trying to come up, what questions can I ask that this coach hasn't been asked before? I mean, he's the author of several books himself. Dozens of books have been written about him, articles. He's always featured in the media. How can I drill down and find out this secret sauce? And so we met. Got off the plane, spent, I think, the evening at Andy's house. The next morning, we met at VIP's, which is a diner in California. It's Tarzania. I may not be pronouncing that correctly. It's a place where Coach went for breakfast just about every morning. In fact, on that slide is the booth that they've kind of memorialized for Coach Wooden. And I met Coach in the parking lot. Andy introduced me. And Andy said, Coach, this is Bill. Bill is Coach. Coach came up to me and said, in fact, can I borrow you for a minute? Bill, how are you? It's so nice to meet you. I've heard such nice things about you. And my jaw probably hit the parking lot. Wow, I was like, nice to meet you, Coach. Something like that came out. I was a little starstruck, I'll admit it. We went in and we had a great breakfast, went back to his condo, and spent what was the first of 3 long recording sessions where I interviewed the coach. By the way, for those of you who think cholesterol is a problem, Coach lived to the age of 99. Every morning for breakfast, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, tea with honey in it. So hopefully there's some hope for all of us who struggle with that. Sports and business. I had a parallel, perhaps they're obvious, but again, you don't need to know a lot about sports to appreciate this. Sports, highly competitive, metrics driven, team individual performance. It's all about learning, getting better than you were the day before, and changing behavior involves a shift in the way people think and the way they are rewarded. For basketball coaching, the reward's playing time. Yeah? And why basketball specifically, maybe more so than any other sport as a business model? The pace of the game, right? The span of control, typically 1 coach to 12 players. That's more or less what the span of control is in corporate these days. Things happen in real time. There's a premium placed on the relationship between the player and the coach. All these things just kind of made sense to me as to why this was a great parallel. I'll tell you a little bit about Coach Wooden briefly, just a little bit more than Steve touched on. Indiana farm boy, one of 6 children, 4 boys, 2 girls. The 2 girls were lost at a young age. His father was probably his greatest influence in his life. He was a high school basketball player, Martinsville, Indiana. The population of the town was 4,800, but the gym could hold 5,200, and it was packed every time the teams play. Indiana's kind of a basketball crazy state. He married his high school sweetheart. He went on to his first national championship was, I think, in 1964, if I'm not mistaken. Coached several great players, as Steve mentioned. Was voted by ESPN as the greatest coach of the century. That's all sports, amateur, professional. In fact, I think ESPN made note of the fact that it was the least controversial selection they had made. I think at the time there was a male athlete of the century, female athlete, coach of the century, John Wooden. Hands down, you can see on this slide 10 national championships in 12 years. Many of you probably hear the phrase March Madness these days, college basketball, the frenzy that goes with that. Many of you, I'm sure, that you don't have to raise your hands or in office pools and things around that. That all really started with UCLA. There were rock stars in the college basketball world back in the day. 6 times coach of the year, 88 consecutive wins, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the records that his team set, and he will tell you his teams, not him, are pretty impressive. He's one of 4 people in the National Basketball Hall of Fame, both as a player and as a coach. The National Player of the Year award, both male and female, is named after John Wooden. You see a slide at the top of the picture that's up there of Coach Wooden receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bush. He could take, I think, 3 or 4 people on that trip to Washington. I think he took his daughter, his son. Guess who else he took? Andy Hill. That's how close they had come again. And some of you may be checking your mail these days. If you do, you might see a John Wooden stamp that the Postal Service just came out with. Icon. And you know the best thing about Coach Wooden? He was a terrific coach, but I think he was an even better person. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit about today. One of the things that Coach Wooden is known for is the pyramid of success. This is a pyramid, and is deliberately in the shape of a pyramid, that highlights 15 different characteristics that Coach felt that his players, his students, because Coach always considered himself to be a teacher, his students had to have in order to achieve greatness, whether it was on the court or in the classroom. The most telling words on this, and this was, again, the challenge of a 10th grade math teacher, and this definition of success was honed over maybe like a 15-year period, if I'm not mistaken. The definition of success, and I'll just read it briefly, success is the peace of mind which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did the best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. That is a mouthful, but it essentially means giving your best, doing your best, preparing to do your best, planning to do your best, executing to the best of your ability. And if you did that and you won, terrific. And if you did that and lost, you tip your hat to the other party, you learn from it, and you move on. I took the book, Be Quick But Don't Hurry, that Coach and Andy had done. And in that book, Andy had outlined 21 coaching principles. And he had given some examples on how they worked in his career. And I really liked that model. And those 21 principles, I tried to organize them. And they fell naturally, I felt, into what I call the SCORE paradigm. S is for staffing. C is for cultivating a culture on your team, in your organization. O is organizing and planning. R, reinforcing desirable behavior on your team. E is how you engage with your team as a teacher, as a leader, as a mentor. In the book, I tried to expand upon these principles and prove, if you will, that in fact they are time-tested, that this is a holistic model. I use over 400 references. And I tell a few stories in the book on how these principles can apply in corporate America, in any managerial role, in any environment, whether you're doing a turnaround or you're working in a mature environment. The very specific outline of the 21 principles, and you can see them there. There's 4 or 5 under there's 4 under staffing. You can see the rest of the outline. What I thought I would do today is just randomly kind of pick 2 or 3 of them and talk a little bit about each one of them. Give you kind of a high-level view. Yeah? Everybody with me so far? Good. Any questions? All right. I'm the one with the tan on the left in that picture. Coach Wooden, I don't think, got out much at that point. All right, number 1, the team with the best players almost always wins. Almost always wins. I'm sure there are Yankee fans in the room who say, wait a minute, you know, we've always had the highest payroll, we should have the best players. Why is it we have had a little bit of a drought in winning the World Series? Well, it's because of this. Just because you have the best talent on your team doesn't mean, certainly doesn't guarantee victories. How did coach live this? And in each principle in the book, I talk briefly about how the coach lived it and spend the majority of the time talking about how we can adapt this in our corporate settings. But for the coach, he said multiple recruiting sources. Okay, he would listen to the team manager, parents, fans. He was constantly a sponge in trying to source where talent may be coming. Okay, he threw the broadest net possible. Character counts, a holistic assessment of background and potential. Now, he did something a little bit different. Okay. He would, when he had a player that he was interested in recruiting, he would perhaps go see the player on the court. And afterwards, he would likely go back to the recruit's house, meet the parents, maybe even back in the day, have a meal with the parents, get to know them a little bit. In doing so, he was being very observant of the relationship of the parent and the player. Was it respectful? Was it open? Was it two-way? In fact, he said to me, he once rejected a player. He stopped recruiting a player because of the relationship that that player had with their parents. He felt the player was rude and disrespectful. He was looking for character, a certain type of character on the team. A couple other things he did. When he scouted a player, he would sit in the first row in the corner of the court, not high up mid-court where you could see everything perhaps a little clearer. He was looking for quickness, and he felt he could gauge quickness better by sitting at court level in the corner. Here's something that I thought was fascinating, because we all do background checks on employees. How about doing one this way? He sent a survey to the opposing coaches that a recruit played against. So I'm from Westfield, New Jersey, and I played basketball at Westfield. And if coach were recruiting me, he would have sent a survey to the coach of Scotch Plains, coach of Linden, coach of Elizabeth. And in that survey, he was again asking for character issues. Was the player good under pressure? Under pressure. Because there's some bright lights in Los Angeles. And he was looking for players who came out of winning programs and were comfortable playing under bright lights. Okay. No promises, just opportunity. When he recruited a player, he said, you'll have the opportunity to come to UCLA. 2 things, the opportunity to get a good education, the opportunity to play basketball. Did not make any promises. Please come to UCLA, we'll build our program around you. None of that. You just simply will have the opportunity to play, the opportunity to get a good education. Bottom bullet up there. A good one, recruiting the best 12, not the 12 best. Team chemistry was important to Coach Wooden. Get the right people on your team. It's not all about skills and competencies, although obviously it's a conversation stopper if you don't have those things. But once you have them, and others do, what's the best fit for our team? What does that mean for us in the corporate world? It means, again, trying to get the best players on our team, keeping a pulse on the workplace, having multiple sources of talent for your organization. Don't just limit it to one school, one particular agency, one particular firm you use. Cast a broad net. Attract talent by raising your organizational brand. What's the brand of your company stand for? What's its reputation? What's its, what do we call it, marketing? The Net Promoter Score. Take an employee survey. Find out what employees think of your brand. What do we call it? The employer value proposition. These things are important. Your employees are your best recruiters. And I do mean starting from the mailroom or reception right up to the top of your organization. You don't know who knows who, whose neighbor is next door, what might get said at the company, at the community, the neighborhood barbecue. We're looking for an accountant. Oh, I know somebody. You don't know. So raise your organizational brand. Get that in a good place. How about your personal profile? How important is that in recruiting? Let me phrase that a little bit differently. Who would want to work for you? She would? Okay. Let me then put you on the spot a little bit. Why would she want to work for you? Couldn't tell you. Well, I'll try to answer that a little bit for you, hopefully because you are going to help develop her career, give her new skills, train her in a certain way, perhaps even take on a mentor role. And you know what the best advertisement is for somebody to work for you? Somebody else who worked for you who moved on in their career. Right? So many hiring managers are so afraid to hire good talent because they may see it as a threat. No, you want to hire people who are perhaps even better than you, that you can learn from. It's all about lifelong learning. Right? There's a book out there today, The 100-Year Life, that talks about today's generation, of the folks entering the workforce today. They could have a 40-year career, a 50-year career, a 60-year career. My friend here at Sumitomo Corporation may remember we had an employee who was 82 when he retired from our Houston office about 5 years ago, working full-time right up to the 82. It's happening. People are working longer, right? Pay attention to your career. Evaluate and select talent for skills and competencies. Again, you cannot compromise that. You're seeing more and more trends of organizations today. Skills, competencies. Job descriptions are under fire. Companies are throwing them out the door. We're not interested in job descriptions anymore. Just what skills can you do? What skills do we need now? Where's the match? Let's get it done. Okay? Paint a true picture about your workplace. I can't tell you as an HR professional how many times this happened. Someone who had been with the company about a month. Knock on my door. Bill, I just wanted to get back to you. I've been here about a month now, give or take, and the job that I thought I was signing up for isn't exactly what's here. You've got now an employee relations problem. Okay, the person thought they were signing up for A. Unfortunately, there may be a little A in the job, but nobody told me my boss was a workaholic and expected that of me. Nobody told me the deadlines were going to be crazy. Nobody told, and you know the list. If you don't give realistic job previews in the interview process, that can come back to bite you. In fact, I know when I recruited, I often painted a bleaker picture, made it sound a little tougher, because I didn't want that knock on my door. And in fact, the knock I wanted in a month was knock, knock, knock. Bill, you described this as being a little tougher environment, but I'm not finding that to be the case. I'm really enjoying this, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Check references. In today's world, everybody's a little hands-off when it comes to references. No company's going to give information. Certainly they'll give, yes, Bob worked here for 2 years, he was an accountant, and that's about it. Many of you are familiar with backdoor references, where you can kind of peel back and find somebody on LinkedIn who knew somebody who worked with this person, and maybe you can get some information that way. I'll tell you 2 quick reference stories. I was working for a pharmaceutical in Princeton, and we needed a doctor with certain oncology skills. And someone said we should hire Dr. Bob. Put Dr. Bob through the interview process. Everybody was kind of thumbs up on him. I say kind of, there's a little bit of a mixed bag, but for the most part, and the vice president of clinical wanted to hire this guy and was pushing to hire this guy. And I said, so just let me do some reference checks. And I did. And the candidate, Dr. Bob, had actually provided 3 different candidates, 3 different references for us to check. Now you think when a candidate gives you the references, you know they're going to be good. I mean, the candidate has coached these references, one would presume, about the job. I called the first reference. The first reference said, under no circumstances would I hire Dr. Bob. He's a disaster. And went on to tell me why this candidate was a disaster. And so I took that information back to our head of clinical and said, listen, we should avoid this guy. I mean, this is one of his references saying don't hire. And of course, corporate needs are what they are. No, we got this, we can change them. Brought him on, guess what we were doing 6 months later? Writing him an exit package, go away. Another reference, and this one, I had a position, this was in an HR, I'm the head of HR, I needed a vice president in a certain sub-function, and a friend of mine that I used to work with, have a great deal of respect for, said, oh, you've got to speak to Susie. Spoke to Susie, she had all the skills, all the competencies, terrific. But there was just something I couldn't put a finger on. My intuition was like, well, I just don't know what it is, but I'm not there yet. So I went back to the gentleman who referred Susie to me, and he again sang her praises. And I moved forward with the offer. And the person started negotiating with me, and it kind of got a little messy. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, well, this person must be good because she came referred by somebody else who I know, I trust. That person wouldn't mislead me. And this person turned out to be a disaster. And I kicked myself because you shouldn't use your intuition to hire someone, because hopefully that'll fit. But you should use your intuition if it's saying stop or hit the brake. And I didn't. I went ahead. And it haunted me and it haunted the company I work for. And again, 6 months later, writing a check. So that's just 2 quick stories about something as simple as checking references. We do it every day. What's the best question to ask when you're checking a reference? Yes. Good. Did you read my book? No. And what's the response you're looking for? It isn't so much the words, absolutely. It's the time it takes them to say it. It's the time it takes them to say it. Interesting. Acclimate your team players. I have a quick story in the book. You want to get your new hires up to date as quickly as possible. socialize them, onboard them, get all the paperwork done, move forward. The faster they get comfortable, the faster they're going to contribute, right? I'll tell this story. It involves a family member. I'll keep his name out of it. He worked for a large financial institution, graduated one in his class from Rutgers, one in his class, had a choice of companies to work for, went to work for one of the larger financial institutions, got there, started a terrific career. Somewhere around the 10-year mark, he got a call from a headhunter who said, you know, would you consider something like this? My brother hesitated, begrudgingly said, yeah, and probably spoke to me, and I, of course, said, take the interview, you got nothing to lose. He took the interview, he liked what he heard, he left the company he was with, he joined the new company. First day on the job, and this is probably at a senior director type level. First day on the job, his boss gets him started, off and running, men's room, vending machine, you know, office, phone, computer. And after lunch, the boss is gone. Second day on the job, boss is nowhere to be found. Didn't say to my, oops, I almost gave away the family member. Didn't say to that family member of mine, you know, anything about not coming into the office that day. In the meantime, my family member is in his office, and nobody's coming by. Nobody's saying hello. Apparently, no organization announcement ever went out. You know, for all he knows, people think he's a stranger or a consultant or something like that. Day 3, same thing happens. At lunchtime of day 3, my family member picks up the phone, calls his former company, and asks if he could come back. And they were good enough to take him back. Not so sure if I was the head of HR, I would have done that, but that's a different story. They took him back, and they said, well, just consider it a couple days vacation. And they did. And by the way, he went on to finish his career there. He recently retired and had a terrific progressive career with that company. My point is the acclimation, the socialization process was a disaster. And that company just did not realize how important that is. And there's a ton of research out there that tells us how important getting your team members acclimated on your team, how important that really is. Okay? Second principle I want to touch on, and I'll go through this a little faster. Team with the most mistakes wins. And that sounds kind of paradoxical. Okay? Counterintuitive. What do you mean the team that makes the most mistakes wins? Yeah. This is really about trusting your team. Right? Trusting your team. I love when the pandemic hit, I would have managers coming into my office saying, you know, how do I know they're working from home? How do I know they're not at the gym? How do I know they're not doing their laundry? How do I know? If you're raising those questions about your team member, why are they on your team? You've got to trust people, and they obviously have to produce and show the results, but you've got to trust your team. You know? You have to have a results orientation, expect results. How many of us have worked with people who seem to get achievement and motion confused? Okay. I worked with someone once who, you know, if you asked them what's going on, they could say, oh, I am on this committee, I've got this meeting, I've got this exposure coming up, I'm researching something. I mean, they could go on for 5 minutes about how busy they were and the piles of paper on their desk. But were they getting things done? And the answer was no. They really weren't. And that caused some separate issues. So you have to hold people accountable. That's the next thing. Challenge the status quo. Many of you, I'm sure, have worked with people who say, but we've been doing it that way for years. Why would we want to change it? When you hear that phrase, the hair on the back of your neck should stand up and say, no, 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 no. Let's take a fresh look at it. Allow people to fall. So I choose that word intentionally, to fall, not fail. I think Simon Sinek refers to it as falling. How many of you remember learning to ride a bicycle? How many times did you fall off before you got it right? Okay? In corporate America, we're not so patient. We want everybody to ride the bike right the first time. But you know what? The people you invest in, the people who learn from their experience, learn from their mistakes, are probably the ones you want on your team because they'll be able to bring that experience and share it with other team members. And so there is something to be said about falling, not failing. And in the book, I go into a fair amount of detail about that and talk also, about famous inventors and how many times it took them, how many tries before they got the light bulb right or something else. It's true. Allow people to fall. Okay? Perform post-mortems. Our corporate lives are busy. Right? I am sure many of you are looking at your watches right now going, okay, I'll be out of here by 10, I can back me off by 10:15, I've got to have the post-mortems. Often we don't take time to say what worked and what didn't work at the end of a project, or even at the midpoint of a project. What's working, what isn't working. Call time out, or at least take that pause after a game, after a project. What can we learn from this? What can we apply next time? We rarely do that because we're racing off to the next fire drill. And there really is something to be taken by that pause button. Okay? And lastly on this slide, I would say don't get discouraged. Right? Don't get discouraged. If you have a vision, you have people who are sharing that vision with you, there's going to be speed bumps you're going to hit. It's part of a learning environment. I often talked about and tried to instill in my company, Sumitomo, trying to create a learning community. That to me is what it was all about. Sharing experience. Many people go to conferences, webinars, come back with, as we used to back in the day, a binder full of information on the latest and greatest. And what did 9 out of 10 of us do with that binder? We put it on the shelf. And it sat there, and it got dusty, right? And 5 years later, you were changing your office or leaving the company, and you throw it out. Yeah. Shared learning. One last one I'll cover, and I think this is probably, if not the most important principle, it's right up there. And this really is about leadership. And it's about your ability, the onus on you, the responsibility of you as leaders, as managers, as CEOs, to know your team. In corporate America, and this was so true in the 80s and 90s, a new CEO came in and basically cleaned house, right? And brought in their team, oftentimes without any regard to the current team. And that's not the way things should be. I mean, you may have to make changes, granted, and oftentimes you will, but you should get to know your team. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their assets? What are their limitations? What are their training needs? Are they worth investing in? What's that old adage? The CFO says, what if we invest in all our people and they leave? And the CEO says, exactly. What if we do and what if they do and they don't? What if we don't invest in them and they stay? Invest in your people, right? Know your team. Coach Wooden won 10 national championships. In 6 of those years, he had a very strong center position. 4 of those years, he didn't. He modified his offense. And by the way, he kept things very simple. This was also true. He kept things very simple. UCLA only had, I think, a handful of offensive plays. They typically played 1 defense. They had 1 out-of-bounds play. The other team knew what UCLA was going to do, knew what they were going to do, and yet UCLA won. It was all about, and here's the one, if you take nothing else away from this discussion this morning, it's about execution. Bill Walton, an All-American player at UCLA, said there were games we didn't even know who we were playing because coach, all he focused on was UCLA. Execution, execution. If we are running our plays to the best of our ability, go back to his definition of success, then no one can beat us. Or at least we're going to play to the top of our game, and if they beat us, so be it. And obviously UCLA didn't lose often. Okay. Demand more from yourself, walk the talk, get out on the shop floor, manage by wandering around. You want to know that pulse in your workplace. Okay, if you're behind your desk, stuck in meetings, stuck in Zoom calls, you're losing touch with the workforce. Okay, the best managers I've ever worked for were out there, even if it was as simple as a hello, how you doing, get a cup of coffee, how was your weekend? Those are important connections with your workforce. You don't want to lose those. Okay? Instill a growth mindset. Carol Dweck has done a lot of work with Microsoft in this area. If you want to know more about that topic, I'd encourage you to explore it. But it's about even changing the vocabulary of being a leader and manager and how you can be motivational and encouraging to those around you. I'll give you one simple example. There is a high school outside Chicago, and they give grades to their students like any other school, well, with one exception. A, B, C, D. They don't give the letter F. Do you want to know what they give instead? Not yet. They give you an NY, not yet, as a score. You're a student. What's the psychological difference between having a report card that says F on it versus not yet? Take that to the workplace. Not quite there yet. I'll get you there. Amazing the difference words make. Words are so powerful. Okay? And you heard me talk a little bit before about embracing lifelong learning. Okay? I am an example, I believe, of lifelong learning. Okay? I had jobs, as my friend at Sumitomo will attest, where it was 24/7 and travel on a minute's notice to anywhere. And yet, during that career, I was able to tackle raising a family and 3 master's degrees and a doctorate, all at night, all part-time. Most students complete it in 2 years. It took me 3 or 4. I always wanted to stay current in my field. I had to. I wanted to be the best in my field, the best I could possibly be. And I wanted my organization to benefit from that. And I wanted to have an impact on the organization. To me, that was the most important thing, having an impact on my organization, hopefully for the best. I did not start my career in human resources. I started it back in the day, the DuPonts, the Monsantos, the FMCs that I used to work for, a chemical company. They'd take you out of college, put you in a management training program that featured job rotation. So I worked in 4 or 5 different functions before I got to human resources. And when I got to human resources, I thought, this is where you have a total view of the organization and can have the most impact. And I started in labor relations, dealing with unions. Talk about having an impact. HR had that. HR to me was the curator of the company's culture. We were the chief of staff to the president or the CEO. HR, through our management practices and policies, set the tone for the culture of that organization. And as we know, culture is so important. So when I peel back this secret sauce of leadership, to me it was about management practices, services, programs, attitudes. But at its best, it was about treating people with respect. And that's really what I found with John Wooden. John Wooden was this grandfather, Norman Rockwell-esque type person that you just wanted to hang out with and learn from, in addition to being a fantastic basketball coach. He was a bit of a scholar. He and his brothers all had master's degrees. In fact, I will share with you the last time I saw John Wooden in person, he died in 2010 at the age of 99. The last time I visited him in Los Angeles in his 2-bedroom condo, was probably a few years before he died. I spoke to him on the phone several times after that, but in person. I was out in Los Angeles at school, and I just called him up in the morning and said, Coach, would it be all right if I stopped by this afternoon? And he said, sure, come on by, which kind of surprised me. I mean, this is someone who had a pretty full calendar, and I just happened to catch him on a good day. And as I was driving the Pacific Coast Highway on the way to visit him in his condo, I thought, oh my gosh, every other time I have visited with Coach, Andy Hill has been there. And he's been our conduit. He's our common bond. He's the icebreaker for conversation. What am I going to say to Coach Wooden one-on-one? I mean, other than small talk. I spent 3 hours with the coach that afternoon. And do you want to know what we did? At his suggestion, we read poetry to each other. It was surreal. And I will tell you, other than my parents, meeting Coach Wooden probably has had the second most influential part in my life. Scholar, scripture, Mother Teresa was a role model, Abraham Lincoln was a role model. He knew more about American history than many others. Some might say because of his age he lived more of it, but nonetheless, there was a scholar aspect to him. I asked the coach about a view that success is about passion. Is passion enough to be successful? His response was, passion is fleeting. Love is what it's about. If you can love what you do, that's first prize. I asked the coach from where he derived most satisfaction, and I bet this answer is similar to perhaps some views in this room. It was from watching his team grow, develop, not only when he was coaching them, but after they had moved on from UCLA. For example, I know I take a great deal of pride in the fact that many people who have worked with me, for me through the years, have moved on to bigger, better roles. I asked the coach if he had any regrets, and he said he wished he had danced with his wife more. He had lost his wife in 1985. And I can tell a lot of stories about the relationship he had with his wife, but they were truly life partners. And lastly, I asked the coach how he wanted to be remembered, and he said as a compassionate man. As a compassionate man. It's been my pleasure to kind of give you a quick overview of what I discovered and continue to discover about leadership and management. And I just wanted to say thank you for having me here this morning. Thank you. Should I ask any questions?
Yeah, if we have any questions around the room?
Hello? Okay. How are you?
Good. What's going
Thank you
on?
very much for this presentation. It was unbelievable. I think we all could agree to that. I have two quick questions.
Sure.
Well, one quick question, one not. Are you actually from Westfield, New Jersey?
Born and raised, go back 6 generations.
So, Greg Fortino, Frank Fortino, I grew up in Westfield. He still lives there.
Okay.
So that's a very small world.
I
See
grew,
you
up
at the
on,
diner.
I grew up on Summit Avenue, Shuttle Drive. My grandparents were at the fork of Witchwood and Canterbury. My great-grandparents lived on Prospect. We can go on a while.
Yeah.
I stayed there last night to come here.
And the second question, you mentioned trust as part of a team. Obviously a very important aspect. I think us as leaders, we have a tremendous amount of ways to measure productivity, success between billing, response times, things like that. Are there any exercises or are there any ways to measure trust from that portion too?
I'm not sure you can measure it other than maybe workplace climate surveys, things like that, but there's 4 ways you earn trust. Right? 1, be honest. People, and by the way, think of this in your personal relationships, not just work. I mean, be honest, be consistent in your behavior, live up to your commitments, specifically the acronym do what you say you will do, and show you care. Show you care about people. If you do those 4 things, I mean, maybe there's others, but my research kind of told me those are the 4 headlines. Be consistent, do what you say you're going to do. I think you'll find that that resonates pretty strongly in the workplace.
Thank you.
By the way, Westfield, that's the 1977 team, and that's me.
Thank you for today. Quick question. So you mentioned engaging with your team, coming up from behind your desk, getting coffee, engaging with them. In a new hybrid or remote environment, how do you adapt some of those interpersonal connections that you're trying to get with your team members to today's hybrid workforce or remote workforce?
Great question. And ultimately, that shifts the demands of your time as a leader. Because it's in the old world, it was as easy, as walking down the hall and sticking your head in everybody's office, but you have to do that virtually now. And that takes a little bit more time and maybe even calendarizing a lot of it. But those checks are important. And your team, some of your team members, they don't require as much hands-on, they don't require as much time and attention versus perhaps those who do require more. For whatever reason, younger, less experienced, new to the team, they require a little more TLC. And so, whether it's in person or virtual, I think you've really got to kind of make sure you don't neglect that. I had a boss of mine once say, Bill, you don't want to be the one who learns about the union organizing attempt, when you start seeing picket lines in the parking lot. You've got to keep a pulse on those things ahead of time. And that's really the message of that particular principle. Okay.
Yeah, Mike?
Bill, question for you. You started the presentation by showing a slide that said 60% of managers, right, are promoted into positions without any training. So my question to you is, in your experience in working with Coach Wooden, do you believe leaders are born or made, right? Well, we can teach skills and competency, and you talked about some of the qualities and characteristics of empathy, creating psychological safety, things of that nature. What is your perspective on being born or made as a leader?
I don't think I've ever been asked that. That's a great question. So often in corporations, I just want to expand upon that quote for a second, then I'll answer your question. We think that, the best salesperson must be the best sales manager. And that's the trap that we fall into. We're under budget pressures, time pressures. We've got to make a move. Gee, it'd be better, faster, cheaper to do it internally than go to the outside. Let's do that. And then ultimately, there's a ripple effect over time when it comes to that. So I think it's a little bit of a combo platter, the answer to that question. But I do think leaders can be taught, or at least shown the recipe for leadership. And that's really what I tried to do in this book. Here's at least something that I think is a pretty good framework to follow. Now, do we all have bad habits? Will we fall off the cart from time to time? Absolutely. Have I worked with people who I thought, how did they ever get to that position? And my God, we could never promote them a step further? Yes. So there's a little bit of me that wants to respond to your question like a consultant and say, it depends. But I think there is a little case by case. But I do think if you're nurturing someone along in their career, they can be taught. But only time really tells that.
Quick follow-up. What's the one quality as an HR manager you look for in hiring a leader?
The first word that jumped out at me was commitment. And that has a lot of tentacles to it. So it's a commitment toward the cause, the vision, the purpose, executing the plan, being committed to that, committing to getting the right resources behind that to make it happen, commitment to caring about your employees. So commitment's the word that jumps out, but a lot of tentacles to that as well. Yes.
Well, first off, it's an amazing, amazing session here. We've learned so much. And secondly, I'm glad that you live in Westfield. Thank you.
I had dinner at Ferraro's last night.
Yeah, so my question is really, leaders, They need love. They need support from the start. What was his, I'm curious, what is his relationship with his immediate family to give him the stride, the love, the passion to bring UCLA to perfection and all the national championships?
So I'm going to comment now on the relationship with his wife, because she was a pillar in his life. In fact, the court at UCLA is named the John and Nellie Wooden Court. Coach Wooden married his high school sweetheart. She would go to all the games. Now, I mean all the games. He had written into his contract that she could travel with the team and be with him courtside for every game. Before every game, if you ever look at old UCLA tapes, you see Coach Wooden, before tip-off, he looks into the stands at his wife and he waves. And he's got a rolled-up program in one hand and a cross in his other hand that was always hidden. That was given to him by a minister before he went into the Navy for World War II. And he kept that with him at all times for safety, for good luck, whatever the case may be. The relationship with his wife was binary. When his wife died in 1985, on the monthly anniversary of her death, he wrote her a letter. And he put it on her bed, on her side of the bed. And he did this every month for 20, 30 years. And he'd tie them up in a bow and leave them there and tie them up. And when I visited his condo, I had the chance to take a quick glimpse in the bedroom. And sure enough, on her side of the bed, and by the way, his condo was like the land that time forgot. I mean, it was circa 1975. It had orange Congolium countertops, and Mark would really be upset if he saw it. Or actually, you'd be excited. He said, I can fix this. But the relationship he had with her, Coach was recognized even as Father of the Year, Grandfather of the Year. I mean, he was so family-oriented. He would turn down, actually, I'd say, he would work into his schedule recruiting trips around his family schedule. I mean, and even his players, when they came to UCLA, he said, we're going to hold practice at this time. We are not going to interfere with your classes, because he was just all about, his 3 F's, family, faith, family, faith, friends. I think it was friendship. Those were kind of pillars for him. He was a man of great faith. His father was a minister. He was able to balance that, I guess is probably a short, but his wife was there for everything. And when he lost her, it was, he would, if you look at tapes, and by the way, there's a lot of YouTube, a lot of Google stuff out there on John Wooden. If you ever get the chance, you want to know a little bit more about him, certainly I'd encourage you to do that. But if you ever catch him talking about his wife, his eyes would well up, 20 years after she passed. Sports Illustrated wrote an article about John Wooden writing these love letters to his lost wife. And they said it was the most responded to article they ever had in the history of the magazine. It really touched that many people emotionally. So he was able to balance friends, family, faith. That's the short answer.
Yes. The Wizard of Westwood.
The Wizard of Westwood. He didn't like that nickname, but yeah. It wasn't about him.
No.
It was all about his team.
Hi.
Hey.
You talk a lot about trust and building a community with your team members. I guess, how do you strike the balance between wanting to show fairness and consistency with your team members, but also adapting your management style to the individual and not having that be conflicting? Because obviously people talk in the office, treat one person one way, another person the other way. So yeah, how do you strike that balance?
Not easy, short answer. Showing favoritism is the quickest way to kill the culture on your team. It will also likely cause a line outside your door at some point that says, if you gave certain favors to so-and-so, why can't I? If you let somebody work flex time, if you let somebody work more remotely, you're going to have a line outside your office. So that's where I come back to trust. I use the word consistency. You've got to be consistent in the way, wherever you draw that bar, you've got to be consistent in the way you treat your employees. Because the minute you're not, the water cooler is going to go crazy, and you're going to find yourself having to go into damage control mode pretty quickly.
So would you what if someone has a certain situations, how do you then handle that so that it doesn't become a water cooler topic?
So that's a little different, okay? And everybody, the child care issue, elder care issue, Fridays this, Mondays that, you've got to manage that. And I, and you're saying, great, Bill, I didn't need, to come to this session to know that, but it has to be managed carefully. And you have to explain, in essence, to the team, we have a one-off situation here. Somebody needs a little help and caring. We're going to help get them through this hump. It means that we may have to make an accommodation of some kind. By the way, never put business needs second to personal accommodations. Business needs always have to come first. Your receptionist cannot work remotely, right? Business needs come first. That would be my advice there. And hopefully everybody on the team buys in and says, okay, it may actually cause your team to bond and be closer because we've got to help Susie get over this hump. She's got a health issue, right? Those are the types of things that you have to deal with. We all do. I mean, everyone here, if I took a poll, I'm sure every hand would go up who's ever had to make an accommodation of some kind. We have to make them, but always put the business needs first. Some accommodations you can't make. At some point, if somebody's going to be out of work, at some point you may have some music you have to face. But to the extent you can try, you try. And maybe that's the way you introduce it to. We're going to try this on an experimental basis.
One more question?
Morning. I'm Kayvon with Waste Connections Garbage Company. We actually service the waste and recycling here. My question to you is, in your leadership training and everything, do you use any of the servant leadership methods or standards from Ken Blanchard in your teachings or anything like that?
Devote a whole chapter to it in the book. That's what John Wooden was all about, servant leadership. What can I do for you? And certainly it was a model that was successful. I believe it is the model to gravitate toward in the corporate world, period. It is, our job is to help others as leaders. At least that's how I view it. Mark, thank you. Thank you.
All right, that was awesome. Thanks so much. Great talk. I know we're all leaving smarter than when we came in. By the way, I bought the book. It's great. So recommend everyone to go out and get it. And our next meeting is next week for the members. See you all then. And again, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.